The other hot drugs, so to speak, were a drug called pomalidomide, which is a sort of a third generation IMiD. So these are derivatives of the parent drug thalidomide. So thalidomide is perhaps the most notorious drug in the history of medicine. It is a drug that caused widespread birth defects in the 1950s and 60s, and it was never approved in the United States. So sort of the epitome of why the FDA exists is to protect us from thalidomide. And but it was sort of serendipitously discovered that thalidomide is a very, very active compound in the treatment of multiple myeloma. There is a second generation drug called lenalidomide or Revlimid, and that has been as successful a drug as there is in the management of patients with multiple myeloma. Well, now we have a third generation drug called pomalidomide, which is perhaps somewhat more toxic than lenalidomide, but also appears to have significantly greater activity. So that was one of the very important findings from this year's ASH. The other new drugs, quote unquote, that are out there, an antibody called elotuzumab, which seems to have significant efficacy. It's a little bit earlier in its development than either carfilzomib or pomalidomide, but that's certainly a drug for which we have great hope. There's been a lot of data on a drug called verinostat, which is actually commercially available already. It was approved by the FDA for the treatment of a very specific kind of lymphoma, something called CTCL or cutaneous T-cell lymphoma. And so it is out there on the marketplace, but it is not really available widely for the treatment of multiple myeloma. So there's been a lot of data about verinostat. I think that that's going to be one of the very important drugs for the treatment of myeloma. There is another derivative of verinostat called panobinostat that is also in development. So that's another very interesting compound, and a whole series of other compounds that are in development that are perhaps not quite as far along as the ones that I just mentioned.